Good evening. Good evening. Harrow, welcome on board. This way, please. Harrow. This way, please. Good evening. This way, please. Harrow, boarding pass, please. Good evening. Harrow. Boarding pass, please. Harrow. Good evening. Good evening. Harrow. Harrow. This way. Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass? Good evening, Harrow. This way, please. Harrow. Boarding pass, please. May I see your boarding pass, please? Boarding pass, please. Good evening. Good evening, Harrow. Good evening, Harrow. May I see your boarding pass, please? This way, please. Good evening. Welcome on board. This way, please. Harrow. Good evening. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Boarding pass, please. Harrow. Welcome on board. Boarding pass, please. Welcome on board, Harrow. Good evening. This way, please. Harrow. Harrow. May I see your boarding pass, please? Harrow. 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 Welcome on board. Harrow. Harrow. Good evening, Harrow. May I see your boarding pass, please? Welcome on board. Harrow. Good evening. Harrow. This way, please. Harrow. Good evening. This way, please. Boarding pass, please. Harrow. Harrow. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Harrow. Harrow. May I see your boarding pass? Harrow. Boarding pass, please. May I see your boarding pass? May I see your boarding pass, please? This way, please. Harrow. Welcome on board. This way. Good evening. This way, please. Welcome on board. Harrow. Welcome on board. Harrow. Welcome on board. Harrow. Good evening. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Harrow. This way, please. Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass, please? Harrow. Good evening. Welcome on board. Harrow. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass, please? Welcome on board. Good evening. Welcome on board. Harrow. This way. Harrow. Good evening. May I see your boarding pass, please? Welcome on board. Welcome on board. This way, please. Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass, please? Welcome on board. Harrow. This way, please. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Harrow. Good evening. Good evening. Harrow. Harrow. Good evening. Good evening. This way, please. Harrow. This way. This way, please. Welcome on board. Harrow. Welcome on board. Welcome on board. Harrow. This way, please. Harrow. 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 Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass, please? Good evening. Harrow. Good evening. Hello. This way, please. Boarding pass, please. This way, please. May I see your boarding pass, please? Good evening. Welcome on board. May I see your boarding pass? May I see your boarding pass? Welcome on board. Hello. Hello. Welcome on board. Hello. Good evening.